What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show, episode 10 today. I'm your host, Roman Zelchenko. I'm an immigration lawyer turned immigration entrepreneur. I'm the CEO and founder of Laborless, an immigration tech startup, as well as a couple of other ventures in the immigration space. And I'm so excited and honored to have our guest today for our 10th episode, attorney Angelo Paparelli. Angelo Paparelli, probably all of you know Angelo, so maybe he doesn't even need an introduction. But as a short introduction, Angelo is one of the sort of eminent immigration attorneys in the space. He has owned his own firm. He's worked at multiple firms. He's currently a partner at Seyfarth Shaw. He is a just marketing genius, and I'm so excited to talk about all the different ways that Angelo has really marketed himself and become the thought leader in the immigration space that he is. So please welcome my friend, Angelo Paparelli. Thank you so much for joining, Angelo. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you, Roman. I'm feeling pressure to live up to that introduction, but I'll give it a try.
No pressure necessary. You just do what you do, and we'll everyone will get so much value out of this. You know, part of me when I was prepping for this and when you and I were chatting before, I kind of didn't even know where to start and what to focus on. I think you and I have spoken about a number of topics, and you generally are a prolific writer and speaker and thinker in the immigration space. What I really wanted to get into with you today is something that when you and I first sort of really met in person, which was when we had a chance to like sit down for dinner last year in DC. I think we probably talked about theater for a good 30, 40 minutes, you know, and it was one of those things where I don't get to talk about that topic with other immigration practitioners, particularly how theater kind of ties back into our practice, especially from the marketing and business development side. So I'm really excited to talk to you about that and just hear your thoughts. And we have some really fun stuff to share with the audience today when we get there. I always love to start a little bit by just kind of coming back to your roots. You know, you're an attorney, you're an immigration attorney. Before or when you went to law school and sort of before you went to law school, I'm curious, you know, did you know you want to be in immigration? Did you know you want to be an attorney? And then when you became an attorney, did you know you wanted to go into immigration? And sort of how did that all come about?
Well, I'll back up to the period before going to law school. I had never thought of being a lawyer, but I read a number of biographies and autobiographies of famous people who used law as a stepping stone to something else. And I encountered the difficulty of having to explain to people, what are you going to make of yourself? What do you want to do with your life? And by the time I was approaching graduation from undergrad, I realized that I didn't have a good answer to that. And so I needed to buy some time. And I'm a curious soul. And I thought, law might be an interesting thing to study. And it sounds dignified, and I can avoid those hard questions. And so I did not plan to be an immigration lawyer. In fact, I took a 2-year hiatus between undergrad and law school because I thought I was going to get drafted into the Vietnam War, because that was quite a prospect at that point. It turned out that I wasn't drafted, and I was put into a deferral category, and I realized that I could now apply to law school. I did. And in the interim period, had done a lot of travel through Europe. And I had also met a number of interesting people at the University of Michigan, where I went to undergrad, who were international. I somehow fell into a large group of Japanese foreign students. My roommate, an American, was a graduate student studying Japanese, and he introduced me. And I became enamored of foreign culture. And I had also traveled during that gap period to Europe and spent time in Italy and France and England. And I was just, as a kid from Detroit, I was just enamored of the idea that there was a bigger world out there outside of the confines of Michigan. And so when I went to law school, I said, I'm going to do something that's going to facilitate my travel.
Hmm.
So I took all of the courses I could in international law, international business transactions. I took a fair amount of tax law. That was by happenstance. I just thought you take tax law like you take castor oil just because you have to. And I was surprised that I did well in it. And I found it an intriguing distortion of the English language. The concept of how the government can take money from people, no matter what they're involved in, whether they're criminals, sex traffickers, however they make their money, the government wants a piece of it. And they have a way of describing their authority to take that money with a fair amount of complex sentence structure in the English language. And that was kind of fun to me because I always liked English and writing and communicating. And so I took these classes and I did well. At the same time, though, between my uh, um, really my freshman year in law school, I met a woman from Iran who was studying as a grad student at the same school, and uh, fell in love. And she said, "That's nice, but I'm going back to Iran." This was before the revolution, and nice knowing you, but it would really be nice if we could pursue this, but I'm going back to Iran. And I wanted out of Detroit. And it wasn't because Detroit was a bad place. I love Detroit, and I still do. But it was because I was living under the shadow of my grandmother, who was a famous entrepreneur. Her name was Lucia Paparelli. And she had a chain of restaurants, I should say banquet halls, where everyone in Detroit at that time got married at the Roma halls. And wherever I would go, because her name was the same as mine, they would say, "Are you related to Lucia Paparelli?" And I had cousins who were involved in the business, and I would be gravitating toward that. And that's why I went to law school as well, because I didn't want to be in that line of business. Not that it's a bad business; it's a great business. In fact, it turns out I put myself through law school by working in the business um, for part of the time anyway, and got to see how much fun it can be being at events that are very emotional, where people are very tender about their relatives, weddings, funerals, and also college graduation parties and class reunions, which are another genre of psychology that we can go into if you're interested. So the point was, I wanted to get out of Detroit. I didn't want to be forced into the family business, and I wanted to travel. And Iran sounded like about as far away as I could get from Detroit. So I said, okay, how about if I come for the summer and meet your family, travel around Iran, and see what happens? Well, it turns out I got married on that trip. And I came back and had every intention that I would graduate from law school and go practice law in Iran. I had met a lawyer there I'd gone for a few summers during law school, and I'd met a lawyer, an American lawyer, who was practicing in Iran and doing quite well because the petroleum industry was a great boom to Iran's economy at that time. And he said, look, get a job for a couple of years as an international business transactional tax lawyer, and you do that and you have a job. So I had my plan. Then, before graduating from law school, the revolution in Iran ensued, and that plan needed to be shelved because it didn't seem prudent to try and go to Iran. But as I was preparing, I learned Farsi because I figured you can't be in a country without knowing the language. So I was able to take an immersive, intensive program, and all of my in-laws spoke Farsi, and all of their friends spoke Farsi. So I actually got to a point, which is still the case today, where although I speak Italian, my Farsi is stronger than my Italian.
Hmm.
And having prepared to do this, I also found that in finding a job after graduation, and that job was at a small Detroit law firm that did international business and did a number of other interesting things. And I had some great opportunities. So two things happened that led me to become an immigration lawyer. One was that I became kind of bored with doing international business and tax because I found that I was chained to my desk.
Mm-hmm.
And I never did any travel outside of Detroit. And moreover, there were no grateful, happy clients at the end of the case. They figured I just did my job, the firm got paid, and that was that. Um, so the senior partner came to me and said, "Hey, we're losing clients, international clients, because we don't have an immigration capability. Would you learn immigration law?" And I said, thinking that this was the kind of, I had been to the immigration service a couple of times with my grandmother, and I saw lawyers there disheveled with a couple of briefcases full of files. It didn't seem like my idea of practicing law. And I told him flat out no. And he said, "Well, I got this brochure for this conference. There's this bar association, and it was called ANAL, which sounded kind of strange, the Association of Immigration and Nationality Lawyers." And that was even more distasteful. So he said, they're going to have a week-long conference in Puerto Rico. Now, this was in March in Detroit, and Puerto Rico sounded great. And I said, "Well, okay, I'll go. I'll think about it." And I went to the conference, and ANAL was the precursor of ALA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association. And there I met three people who were as different as night and day from one another and from me, each of whom were really interesting personalities. And they were so inviting and friendly. And they said, "You can do this. It's not hard." And at the same time, I was getting people approaching me from Iranians in the United States, who were saying, I'm afraid to go back, or I've got my relatives stuck there. Can you get me a visa? And all of a sudden, I had people asking me for help in an area with which I was completely unfamiliar. And many of them had investigated it on their own and seemed to know more than I did. And it kind of got under my skin that people were asking me questions and I was feeling stupid. So go to this conference, come back an immigration lawyer. And the interesting thing about ALA that I'll say is still true today, but the collegiality of the immigration bar is more the larger point I would make, and that is that they're inviting and they're helpful and they want you to succeed. Whereas I had been to other bar association events, and this was like going into a throng of jackals who just did not want to be friendly, did not want to help you, looked down on you, or thought of you as competition. And instead, ALA has a kind of, I was going to call it a Stockholm syndrome, but it's not really that. It's more partners in struggle, partners in misery, because we have the same opponent, the federal government, the federal immigration bureaucracy. And so I found that when I started doing these asylum cases, and I had some business transaction cases, and I even did some deportation where executives were being removed because they were thought to be working in the United States without permission. And I was just in my element, because immigration law has all of the positive qualities that I enjoyed in tax law. It covers every facet of human existence. It is administrative law, it is corporate law, it is family law, it is criminal law, it is human rights law. And at the end of the day, the government, in those days, they didn't fight that hard. In those days, you could have everything you needed to know on one shelf of a bookshelf. And it wasn't that hard to demonstrate capability. And my business law background and my Farsi language sort of made me an oddball, but interesting. And I began to get referrals from the immigration bar from people outside of Detroit. And so that's a long story, but I found myself being an asylum lawyer and a business immigration lawyer. And then I started going in the early 80s to Europe and becoming a consular lawyer, getting visas for Iranians coming as visitors, intra-company transfers, specialty occupation workers, students. And I was in my element, and I've loved it ever since.
There's so many, thank you. I mean, that's incredible. And there's so many things there that I can relate to. The first one that stuck out to me was that I actually really wanted to travel as part of my legal career as well. And I guess I knew about immigration law, or I fell into immigration law, and sort of stuck with it because I thought it would allow me to travel. Interestingly enough, it didn't. And I only really was able to travel when I started my own business, but I did have that desire too, to kind of get out in the world. You said you spent your summers in law school in Iran. I spent my second year summer where everyone was supposed to get their internship that allowed them to get that full-time job in Israel, in working for Hias, the immigration nonprofit. And, and it was an incredible experience. I mean, it was wonderful. So I sort of really resonate with that. But one question, if, I don't want to go too deep into it, but I'm curious, especially now, what was Iran like before the revolution? I've seen I've watched a lot of movies, and I actually saw a play here in New York City recently from an Iranian playwright who sort of harkened back to the pre-revolution days and shared photos and things like that. It was really touching. I'm just curious, especially because you really dove so deeply into the culture. Can you share?
I was fortunate because I got to travel throughout Iran. I went to Shiraz. Excuse me, that's the one city I didn't visit. I went to Isfahan, Mashhad, to the northern Caspian Sea area, and a beautiful country, a large country with geographically diverse climate and topography, an empire, the Persian Empire, and it has such a rich history of mostly of invasion by intruders who then tried to get the Persians or the Iranian people to assimilate, and only with some success. And the thing that was most interesting, because Detroit has a large Arab American community. Dearborn, Michigan is I think the largest in the country. So I had been around a lot of Arabs, and Iranians are not Arabs, but they cohabit the Middle East. And it was for me very interesting because my impression was surprising that Iranians love America. And it breaks my heart because they still love America. And, that's one of my journeys through immigration law, is to go through the phases of antipathy and discrimination against Iranians wanting to love America, wanting to come here. And so the country was extremely prosperous at the time, beautiful. There was interest in the arts, and I just had a great time.
Yeah,
I wish I could go back. I mean, there may be a day when I will go back.
Yeah, I hope so
but
too.
But now I live in Tehrangeles, so it's
it's a close second.
Yeah.
So great. That's so wonderful. And so you came back from this AILA conference, and you became essentially an immigration lawyer. How did your immigration career sort of take off from there? You basically, it sounds like you built an immigration practice for this firm. You eventually did go off on your own. If you could just touch on that very briefly.
Sure.
What was it? How did you feel confident enough, or what made you think, I want to do something of my own rather than work for someone else?
Well, it wasn't so much that as my wife wanted to go to Los Angeles, and not being able to go to live in Iran, I still wanted to be out of Detroit. And I had visited California when I was a kid a couple of times, and I thought, that's cool. That's a nice place to be. And so I didn't have a job. I tried to get some work from the firm I was leaving because I left on good terms, but that never really panned out. So I landed in LA. I got admitted to the California bar. I was finding that no one was knocking on the door, and that I had to feed myself and my family. And it turned out that I had a reputation already. I had spoken once before at one of the AILA conferences. Deborah Anker, who heads up the Harvard Asylum Clinic, and well-known immigration professor, is a friend, and she was doing an asylum panel and she saw me in the audience, and there was no one on the panel that knew anything about Iranian asylum. And she says, "Angelo, come up here." And that was my first invitation to speak at an AILA conference.
Wow.
I sort of barged in on a panel that I wasn't even slated to be a speaker, and I started with that. I got a reputation in business immigration. Very few immigration lawyers came from a business transactional standpoint. Most immigration lawyers up to that point, it's not true anymore, came with a background in poli-sci, history, English, sociology, and I was sort of an unusual bird. And I found that it was interesting to discuss business concepts in the context of immigration problems. So I had done L's, I had done E's, the immigrant investor, the intra-company transferee, or non-immigrant investor and trader. And so I was able to become sort of repeat counsel, local Los Angeles outpost for a Washington, D.C. law firm. And I came to realize that AILA was going to help me. I tried to get active in AILA in the chapter level. And there I found the phenomenon that, frankly, the chapters, both in Detroit and in Los Angeles initially, were not very welcoming. It's not that they were cold, but they were too busy making money in those days, the individual lawyers, to bring someone under their wing and sort of help them along. So the people I had met on my first Puerto Rican excursion were in other chapters and were not quite as welcoming in either Detroit or in Los Angeles. In fact, I had to petition AILA National to change AILA's bylaws so that no chapter could exclude someone who wanted to be a member. And that was successful. I wasn't the only one that was moving that effort, but when I joined the Michigan chapter, I was declined. I tried to join the Detroit chapter of AILA and was told that you have to practice immigration law for 2 years before we'll consider you. And so you couldn't even gain the experience to get a membership. By then, when I got to California, everybody was busy making money, whether it was dealing with Hollywood productions or the flood of Iranians coming into LA, but people were not very warm and friendly. And ironically, I owe it to the Texas chapter to have gotten my invitation to be welcomed in the Los Angeles chapter, the Southern California chapter of AILA. And that was because I was asked to be a last-minute stand-in for a well-regarded lawyer who had a conflict. Every year, the Texas chapter would have its winter conference, usually in a warm part of Mexico. And I get a call. I'm in Europe. My secretary wakes me up in the middle of the night and says, "This fellow wants to invite you to speak in Mexico, in Puerto Vallarta, and they'll pay your way. Are you interested?" I said, "Yes, I need it," because it turned out that travel was much more exotic in my mind than in reality, because it's quite stressful practicing immigration law out of a suitcase when you have a constant stream of eager people who are scared whether they're going to get their visa or not. And then they get their visa, they're happy, then they're gone. And in comes the next frightened family, one after another. And you have to keep your office running in the United States. So I was exhausted. I get this invitation, "Will you talk about consular practice?" And I did. And people liked it. And they gave me a Texas passport, and that's not a real passport. And I came back to LA and continued to hunker down and try to publicize my capability with not much success. And then it turns out that a DC lawyer was speaking to an LA lawyer about the LA lawyer needed to find a consular expert to speak in Los Angeles. And the LA lawyer was saying, "We really don't have anybody in this town who knows anything about this." So she said, "Why don't you ask Angelo? He's right there." I got invited to speak, and from then I was part of the group. They welcomed me. I ultimately became an officer of the chapter, and it was through that officer role that I was able to leave my solo practice as I started it, not very successfully at it, and joined my first of what is now my third big firm. Um, and uh, and what I learned was that speaking and writing, we'll get back to the subject of marketing, which is really what you want to talk about. Speaking and writing is a great way to show people that you know what you're talking about and to differentiate yourself. And frankly, I don't consider myself particularly unusual or gifted in the communication skills that I have. What I think is that I got a basic foundation in English from the nuns in parochial school. And from then on, it was just sentence structure, diagramming sentences, and simple stuff that everyone should know if they have a foundation in English. And it's doing so in a way to entertain myself. Because I feel if I'm boring to myself, I'm going to be boring to other people.
Amen.
And so I have certain approaches to writing. I have approaches to communicating the practice, the issues that are important in immigration law, an approach to advocating in immigration law. And if you want, we can talk about that because I think enough biography has been dispensed with at this point.
Well, so one of the things that I find really striking about the story that you just told is that, people might look at you now and see, Angelo Paparelli, the successful lawyer that everybody knows, but it's clear that you had struggles, some that were based on the fact that you were, sort of still a new, inexperienced attorney, and others were outside of your control where you were trying to get more experience, but the powers that be just weren't letting you with this like 2-year minimum requirement, et cetera. But what I really find interesting about what you said is that sort of along the way that you, or at least part of the way that you broke out of this sort of novice shell was by, whether you liked it or not, essentially branding yourself as somebody who did a couple of very specific things that many other people didn't do. And that brand was known by other people who said, hey, talk to Angelo about this. Hey, talk to Angelo about that. Right. And I think that actually goes really directly into marketing, because from my perspective, and I say this a lot to solo and very small immigration lawyers who don't have any specialty. And when I talk to them, some of them say like they're waiting for the phone to ring. And I usually ask them like, well, what do you really specialize in? And they say over the years, a lot of different things, kind of whatever comes my way. And I know that it's not the only reason, but I look at that and say, well, maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe if you really, at least for some period of time, specialized in something such that other people knew you as the specialist for that thing, opportunity will come knocking on your door, because when there aren't that many doors, and yours is the door for them.
I have some thoughts along the way. I mean, I once sat next to a lawyer who was a few years older than I, and he had already become famous as a labor certification expert. And I was curious because he had developed a national reputation. And I asked him, how did you do that? And he said, it's really not very hard. I wrote a couple of articles, and those articles led me to be invited to speak. And all of a sudden, I was a labor certification expert. And I thought to myself, and I said, that makes a lot of sense. But the last thing I would want to do is, it's sort of like in Hollywood, you don't want to be typecast as a certain character. If you're a comedian, you're never going to get a dramatic role. If you're a dramatic actor, you're never going to get a comedy role. Or it used to be that way, because producers, directors only saw you as a certain thing. And I said, I want to do things that I find interesting and enjoyable, because if I'm not having fun, I'm going to look like I'm not having fun, and no one wants to be around people who are morose. And so I said, what are the things I like to do? And I'm also kind of easily distracted and bored, and I'm curious. So I said, let me find a repertoire of things that are interesting to me, because the worst thing in the world would be to get hired to do something that's not fun.
Yep.
And so I have developed a variety of subspecialties. And I have made it a point of writing articles which lead to speaking invitations on these subjects, which also lead to visibility with the federal government. And when you having to approach the government for something. And if you're known for an area of expertise, that's always a lift and advantage. And so I began to write articles, but I kept writing on diverse subjects, never always the same thing, but I would return to them. So I've probably written 10 articles on the H-1B area, probably 5 to 10 on L1s and E2s. I've written at least 12 to 15 on the immigration consequences of mergers and acquisitions and corporate restructurings. And I've done consular articles. I've done, because I find it interesting. And there's always something new in each of these fields. And one of the things, first of all, I want to mention someone who I think can help a younger lawyer do this, and it's free because he just has a newsletter. His name is Trey Ryder, Trey Ryder. I think it's Rider. And he does something. His philosophy is the same as mine. He's got a concept known as education-based marketing, and so I put out education when I write, but I also have a certain approach to make it interesting to myself and to the audience. And so the last thing I want to do is spend too much time narrating a new development, because I'm going to have perhaps 10 to 15 competitors doing the very same thing. And I don't want to be known as a narrator. I want to be known as an analyst, as a thought leader. And so I spend 1/3 of an article saying what's new. But then I spend the next 2/3 saying, why is it important to you, the reader, and what can you do with it? And I try to put that encased in lively writing and entertaining writing, so that it usually will have a grabber of a headline, an introductory paragraph that just sucks the reader in, may have nothing to do with immigration, it depends, and then I have a closing paragraph at the end where I tie it all together. So those are the elements of how I would say to a lawyer: find out what you like it a lot, because you're going to succeed and you're going to get a lot of that work. So if you don't like that work, don't write about it, because you'll be known for it. And then persist. And to the degree you have the capability to vary what you write about, so that you have not a reputation for more than one thing, you're going to get more work, and it's going to be interesting because it's going to vary. And so that's basically the approach. There are a few other things we can talk about, but that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. And, for me, I'm always sort of proselytizing LinkedIn as a really amazing medium. I know that you're very active on Twitter, for example. You're also active on LinkedIn, but you're also very active on Twitter and Facebook and a lot of these other platforms. It's essentially been a democratized way of disseminating the information that you're putting down onto paper. Before, you had to be published in some kind of a newsletter, or you were sort of bound by other people's publications, whereas now you could be your own publication. I think the one thing that you mentioned about LA or Hollywood, you didn't want to be typecast because you wouldn't be able to get another role. But then you said now that that's not necessarily the case. I think now more than ever, especially for somebody starting out, and it's just an approach, right? If you niche down into one particular thing that you love and you get really good at it, if you're in a place where you're very well known for one type of immigration law and you now want to expand into another type, but you've become very good at that first type, that's a good place. That's a good problem to have. If you're like, okay, well, all the L1 visas from this particular region are coming in, I want to grow. That's a way better problem to have than saying, oh, I'm sitting by my phone and it's not ringing. So
yeah, it's a great problem, but it's not a prudent hedging your bet asset allocation strategy. If we could talk financial planning for a moment, because in 2 periods of my time, tech went down, and I was doing a lot of tech-focused client development and receiving clients from that. And tech then just dried up, consistent with the economic circumstances of the time. And so I found that it was hard to hustle and drum up new business quickly. And so I would say it is a good position to have as long as the economic winds are blowing in your direction. But if it changes abruptly and you've got no gas engine and you're using a sailboat and the wind stop, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
So I would say try to have some fair weather, um, climate-proof practice areas that are likely to be successful. One of the ironies of immigration law is that we have three federal agencies, three federal departments: Homeland Security, State, and Labor. And within DHS, we obviously have ICE and USCIS and CBP. Those are essentially five different practice areas.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes one organization, one department is going to be, the door is shut. We're going to be so hard, you're not going to get anything from us. And ironically, at the very same time, another department is somehow liberal. Somehow, for whatever reason, they're easier with. And so if you can vary your practice so you have offerings in front of each of these areas, you've got yourself a kind of solidity and durability that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it. We're actually starting to get in some questions. I'm going to hold off on questions for a little bit because I wanted to get to a couple more things, but I will invite people to please leave your questions, leave your comments here. Would love to, we really want to pick Angelo's brain. I mean, what better opportunity than right now? We're not running to another AILA conference. We're just here glued to our chairs. Everything we've been talking about so far, particularly around your writing style and your skill, and then how you've sort of leveraged that into your business development. Is that what led you to start Nation of Immigrators, or how did that start your blog?
My blog, and if anyone really wants to deep dive in that, I was interviewed about a month ago by Lex Blog. They host my blog, and I went into in greater detail. But basically, I thought of it as cheap psychological therapy for myself. What I found was that I was getting increasingly frustrated with the bullheadedness of the government, and I needed to have an outlet, and this was cheaper than going to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And so I wrote an open letter to the USCIS ombudsman. And then because I was on LinkedIn or whatever, I figured, I can publicize this. And I became aware of blogs. I started my blog in 2004, and I was introduced to it at that point as a platform from which to amplify your message. And that's what I see as all of social media. It's a scalable amplification at no marginal additional cost of the same work you would do if you're going to write a book that would, or an article that would go into a conference handbook and then be relegated to the dustbin of history. So why not put it out there and amplify that message as loud as you can in as many different forums as you can, so it hits as many eyeballs as you can. And as a result, I said, hey, this is really cool. And I felt pretty good criticizing the government in that open letter because whether anybody listened to it or not, it happened. I had had that experience once before, and it was kind of a very private experience. The Paperwork Reduction Act allows any member of the public to comment on a government form. And I wrote a comment on the non-immigrant visa application that existed at the time because I felt that a statement on that form was flatly an incorrect statement of law. And it dealt with whether a student or a tourist or business visitor could work. And it said they could not work. And I said, that's not true. There are certain circumstances under the law where they can work, and it's recognized. And I got the Office of Management and Budget under the Paperwork Reduction Act to put the word generally in the sentence. that stated they generally cannot work, so that someone could answer that question accurately and not have to be boxed into a question. And I felt really good about that. And I said, anytime I can get the government to do my bidding, sitting at my desk and not having to mount a huge effort, I want to do that because it's gratifying.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started writing these articles, these blog posts, where I would try in whatever way I could. I always wanted to be lawyerly, but I wanted to write as a layperson could read what I said. And the beauty of blogging is you can use hyperlinks and provide background without getting distracted, and you don't need footnotes.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is you can be very conversational. You can be as entertaining and artistic as you want. You can be funny. You can be satirical. You can do all of these things. Now, most lawyers won't do that. They're worried about their proper reputation, or will the government retaliate? And I'm here to tell you that if they ever retaliate against me, which they haven't, I want the lawyers and the listeners to start the Angelo Defense Fund, because I'm innocent and I need defense. But they haven't. In fact, they've given me a wide berth because they know that I will write something about them that will make them look foolish or stupid. And that's what any lawyer can do if they write it in the proper way. I never curse at anyone. I never insult people, but I point out their foibles. I mean, we haven't talked theater yet. I do hope we do, but Moliere, for example, had a wonderful way of pointing out the absurdity of society. Well, there's an absurdity in government as well, in terms of the way things happen. You can either weep right now, or you can find it ironic and hilarious and point it out, and some people will appreciate that. But I've had situations where government officials have come to me privately and they said, thank you, Angelo, for writing about that subject, because you gave us an avenue to discuss it behind closed doors and come up with a better policy. And that has happened. I mean, I don't think I really can say this, but I wrote a very fun blog post that predates the DACA actions of the executive order of President Obama. And I gave the president some way of thinking about how to find a method to save the dreamers. Now, he didn't choose the exact way that I suggested, which was parole in place. But the point is, I created this theory that there were people protesting outside the White House, and Tinkerbell flew into the window of the White House and started talking to Barack and telling him what he needed to do. And I had a lot of fun with that. But there are a lot of different things you can do, many, many ways of communicating a message that will tell a story, that will make it human, that will persuade, entertain, maybe even make people a little bit and have fun. And that's what it should be. It should be fun, because it can be otherwise too sad, dreary, and depressing.
That's amen to that. I think providing value and education and entertainment at the same time is a really wonderful combination, a really great way of keeping people on the page, or on the screen, if you will, and keeping them engaged, but also educating them and informing them somehow, or, to your point, giving them an opportunity to discuss something that they've wanted to discuss but haven't had an avenue to, or haven't had a third party come in and give them a different sort of point of view. I wanted to, very briefly touch on the subject. I know I kind of mentioned this earlier when you and I were talking a few weeks back, but as a New Yorker, today is September 11th, and it's a really important day for me and for people in this country. I mean, in the city, but also in this country, and I suppose around the world. One of the things that you and I talked about was that you had actually written shortly after September 11th, you had ended up writing essentially a thought piece around what potential immigration implications there would be, or could be, or that you could envision. I'd love to maybe just for a few minutes dive into that a little bit, just because I think
Sure.
it's just timely, and it's something that I think is important, because not all, you could write something about a serious topic such as this shortly after, an awful or terrible occurrence, but still have it be pointed and, not quote unquote too soon. So I don't know. Can you kind of like explain a little bit about that?
As I recall, I talked to, first of all, that the tragedy will change everything, that there will be a severe governmental reaction, that maintaining lawful status in the United States is something that would have to be done with impeccable precision, because if you fall out of status, the consequences are going to be most severe. I suggested that there would be enhanced screening, and President Trump has called it extreme vetting, but that's what's happened. And that, and I don't remember if I put that in this particular piece or in other pieces, but about the importance of understanding our common humanity and not losing sight of the contributions of immigrants to this country. Because in my view, this concept of American exceptionalism is a rarely troublesome, almost jingoistic, chauvinistic kind of concept. We're not better than the rest of the world. We're all human beings. But the one aspect of exceptionalism is our tradition as a welcoming nation of immigrants. And to the degree that September 11th would prevent that from manifesting and continuing, and it has. I mean, look at where we are today. That would be something we'd have to resist. And so I truly believe deeply in my heart that America is enriched by the people who strive and thrive by giving up everything that they have and coming here. And that takes a courage, that takes a certain willingness to risk it all. It takes extreme commitment to family, because that's usually why people do it. It's not money as much as family. And so we have these historic pressures that have existed from the beginning of the Republic around immigration. It's an ambivalent subject for many people, but it's one that makes us great. And that's why I wrote this. And frankly, it wasn't very hard to predict what would happen. All you have to do is be a sort of superficial, casual observer of history to figure out that there would be a whiplash, a backlash, and that things would get tougher. And they have.
There's a question that came up that I think would be really a really nice sort of continuation of this, from Mariela Benitez, who asks, can you speak to the immigration policies and changes you believe that this administration will focus on before the elections? I know it's hard to obviously say, and on the other hand, there's been a lot of indication, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, since we kind of brought up the Trump administration and things that have been changing.
That's a great question, Mariella. And I mean, I think it's happening on a daily basis, multiple times a day. They've announced that they're going to do records checks on American citizens, iris scans on American citizens. They're going to completely revamp the H-1B rules to make it harder. They're obviously trying to ratchet up the filing fees. I filed earlier this week on behalf of the Alliance of Business Immigration Lawyers an amicus brief in the USCIS filing fee litigation, saying that the Fraud Detection and National Security Directorate of USCIS is an unlawful agency because it engages in investigation and intelligence gathering activities which are prohibited to USCIS under the Homeland Security Act, and no money should be spent for that. And yet that's what they're doing. They're trying in every way. I was naive in thinking that not much would change when the president came into office. But I have been astounded. From Buy American, Hire American, the executive order that was supposed to only affect H-1Bs, it's basically affected all of legal immigration and encouraged in a sort of dog whisper, dog siren kind of way to get tough on all categories of immigration. We're seeing it with intellectually dishonest decisions, ones that make no logical sense. I encourage lawyers to be ready for litigation and for advocacy if there is a change in government. The Congressional Review Act, which will allow midnight regulations to be overturned, is going to be a hot area of focus. Those are things I'm thinking about.
Thank you. Yeah, it's agreed that it's been really kind of frustratingly, just been a lot of frustrating changes and happening at a very, very fast clip, and it's sort of almost hard to keep up sometimes. And again, I don't practice anymore, so I kind of am a little bit on the sideline, but even I'm on a daily basis watching to see what's happening with the H-1B world.
Roman, you have teased your audience, but you haven't followed through. You were going to talk a little bit about theater.
Well, I was going to get to that right now because I wanted to transition.
Good.
Yeah, so I wanted to transition a little bit away from, this sort of doom and gloom aspect of immigration, or kind of more of the challenges that we're seeing today, and kind of to go back to a little bit of what we talked about, a lot of what we talked about before around being creative and putting yourself out there in a way that both showcases your expertise and your knowledge, but also really entertains and makes people feel good in various ways. You and I, again, talked about theater quite a bit. How did you get into this sort of, appreciation for and perhaps love for theater, and kind of what allowed you to feel comfortable enough to have your professional life be affected by it? And I ask that because I think a lot of attorneys, at least who I've spoken to, see the merit in being creative, right, in how they present themselves, but are understandably a little worried, how they'll come off. So I don't know. How did you do that?
Well, I've been involved in grade school and high school theater. When I got to college, I realized I was in a tough academic environment, so I didn't think I could spend a lot of time on stage. I took a lot of theater appreciation classes, theater history classes, and I realized, I really believe this, that we humans learn more by storytelling, absorbing fable and myth and story from the time we were all cave persons sitting around a fire. Are we still there?
Yes.
Okay. And that's the way people absorb information. They remember it more because it's based on a story. And so I have tried to use theater as a way of telling immigration stories. And I'll give you an example. I persuaded the former general counsel of the Immigration Naturalization Service, Paul Virtue, and a senior member of the immigration bar, Richard Rulon, who's passed away, to put on circus costumes. And I would put one on, and we would do the immigration consequences of mergers and acquisitions and corporate restructurings, while imagining the merger of two circuses, one taken off of Ringling Brothers and the other sort of taken off of Cirque du Soleil. And we were playing clowns, and I was the ringmaster, and we told a story because we were also general counsel. And so we merged them and we discussed it. And I'll tell you, I've had people who knew this area of law sit up and take note because they learned a few things. But I've also had a lot of people who didn't know anything about it laugh and smile and take a whole notebook full of notes about the subject. And there's the picture. And
so for anybody
Paul is
who's
on the left, I'm in the middle, and Rich Rulon, may he rest in peace, is on the right. I've done the same with responding to RFEs by treating them as weapons of mass destruction, and having my good friend Eleanor Pelta and another lawyer come in marching to military cadence and wearing military uniforms. And I've done it at the NAFSA conference wearing a mad scientist outfit. And the funny thing, and I've even did a little role playing at the AILA conference, where you can get the message across, but people will remember. And you never know what people are going to remember you for, but hopefully they'll remember you because you made them smile and you made them think. And so that's sort of the sense of this. This is how I like to work it. There I am, showing off my black belt, but at the AILA conference, trying to get people to come and consult with me on complex immigration problems. And it worked. I did get some engagement on that. And so I guess the thing that's fun is to have fun and create the fun for yourself, because if you're having a good time, most people will enjoy it and they'll jump right in. The water's fine.
Now, Was there a point where you just thought that this is something I want to try because everything else I've done hasn't worked? Or did it just come naturally, kind of a no-brainer to you, thinking, I want to have fun with this, but I know that it won't hurt me in the long run? Because I think that's just something that I really would love to hammer home to some of the viewers, to your point, that you can have fun and it will not hurt you professionally. If anything, it will help you.
You want to be able to stand out, and you want to be standing out in a way, not like Michael Cohen, but maybe like Adam Schiff. And the point I would make there is that if you're not memorable, you're forgettable. If you're going to be doing the same thing that everyone else is doing, you are just a commodity. And so the reason, I mean, I took a class in improv. I took a class in theater techniques for the business professional. And I came to realize, and I've taken a lot of classes in improv acting since then, that it's all about having a nimbleness of mind and a fearlessness, which is hard to come by, but you do it a few times and that goes away. Be yourself. People come to conferences, whether they're virtual or in person, because they want to learn, but they don't want to be bored either. You know, life is boring enough with the tedium that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. They want to have fun and they want to be edified. And that can be done with storytelling. And theater is nothing more than storytelling.
Agreed. And, you know, you touched on improv. That's something that I'm very passionate about. I actually didn't do theater at all when I was a kid, you know, apart from having to be in the school play sort of at the end of the year from my class. I never wanted to. And I got into improv theater in law school just as a way. It was my cheap therapy. Rather than writing, it was improv comedy. And I fell in love with it, and also saw it as a way to sort of not just talk through my problems via a story and made up scenario, but really find practical skills, thinking on your feet, being emotive, being empathetic, right? Thinking really creatively and very quickly as well. So it was interesting, because I'll never forget this. When I was practicing, I remember I was in DC and I signed up for an improv class in DC Improv, which is actually a really great stand-up place, but they also teach improv classes. And I remember I was telling, I think, someone at work, and I was like, hey, I'm doing my improv class tonight. And they were like, haha, tell me a joke, clown. And it was one of those moments where I'm like, you don't even know how powerful this is, and you're just being ignorant to what I do. But it kind of put a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, I think, to say like, all right, well, if that's how people take this, that means I'm going to go the complete opposite way and try to incorporate this as much as humanly possible into my career as, an immigration professional. So I was really curious to see kind of how you came into it. And I love your thoughts about being memorable. And if you're not memorable, you're forgettable. It made me think of the fact that when you're memorable, you create this scarcity around who you are as a person and who you are as a character on this earth. And scarcity is value. And so how can someone value if you don't have some kind of scarcity, whether it's a real actual skill or it's something about you that isn't based on skill, but about your aura and about your persona. And that could be based on something that is like as funny and seemingly silly as a clown costume, but you're scarce. You are inherently a rarity. And if you're a rarity, you have a lot of value, or you're potentially even priceless. And I don't know, I just made that sort of connection in my head of being a commodity versus not. And I love this idea of trying to not be forgettable and use theater.
Yeah, there's a famous marketing guru who writes a lot named Seth Godin. Mm-hmm. And Seth wrote a book called The Purple Cow. And he observed that if you are driving through the French countryside and you see a cow, that's nice, ho-hum, a cow. But if you drive through the countryside and you see a purple cow, that's remarkable. And so you want to be remarkable in a positive way. And the fact that you're a little bit out there, I mean, people are are going to be impressed because that's gutsy, and they're a little bit envious because they've got their own squeamishness about doing it. And I just say, go look at the scene from Moonstruck where Cher slaps Nicolas Cage in the face and says, "Get over it."
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's what I say. If you want to have an impact, you got to be prepared to make an impression.
So what do you think about the future of our industry, of the immigration industry? I mean, if we talk about this marketing piece for a little bit, do you think that sort of run-of-the-mill lawyers can survive and thrive in the long run? Or do you think that more attorneys should be really, or, you know, any practitioners in our space should be trying to find their, you know, find their version of the purple cow or their clown costume or their black belt? You know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, immigration is going through a transformation. We have lots and lots of non-legal or non-lawyer organizations providing immigration services. The notion that we can practice in the good old-fashioned ways and just do good work and the phone will ring is history. We have to be able to completely and persistently reinvent ourselves. And I don't like to call anybody run of the mill, but either you're going to be dedicated to this or you're going to be a dilettante. And dilettantes have a way of not persisting or not being taken seriously. And so, and if you're not passionate about this field, find something you're passionate about, because it's tough. The competition is really difficult and it's expanding rather than contracting. And I see all sorts of niche products and services. I'm in this space as well. I can't talk about it, but stay tuned, have me back another time and I'll tell you what it's about. But I believe in legal tech in the immigration space, and I think there's going to be real opportunities. I also believe in the sort of Hollywood model where you don't have a standard bevy of artists under one movie studio anymore. You have production companies that pick and choose director and artist and cast and cinematographer, and they come together for a project, and maybe they don't work for a couple of movies and then they work together again. Not always the same team. So there's going to have to be alliances. I should mention something that I really believe in strongly. Strength in numbers. Lawyers should create their own brain trust, their mastermind groups of like-minded people who will support them in hard times. I founded the Alliance of Business Immigration Lawyers some 20 years ago, basically as my version of a 12-step group. I was lonely, I was fearful, and I wanted to talk to somebody because immigration had become unmanageable. And anybody can form a group of like-minded people who are simpatico, who trust each other, who behave not like competitors, but as respected colleagues. And you form your group. Find the people that you really are impressed with. Also find your mentors. There are people out there that want to do nothing but give back. I mean, I've done a lot of different things, but if I find a lawyer, and I've done this over and over in my career, if I find a lawyer who's eager to learn, eager to achieve and strive and has a little fire in the belly, I'll help them up. You know, it's pay it forward. So there are a lot of us out there. We're not alone. And when I meet my maker, the few things I learned are going to go with me. So I might as well, unless I put it down in pen and paper and ink or digital ink, it's going to be forgotten. So I like to have that human connection, and people should know that we're stronger together. There's a Japanese phrase that I sort of flipped, and the way I say it is, none of us is as smart as all of us. And so we're better together.
Do you think that, you know, for younger or perhaps more junior attorneys, you know, what do you think is a good way to sort of approach, you know, more experienced attorneys and ask them for help or mentor?
Ask a question. There are a lot of Facebook groups right now that offer opportunities to be kind of intimate in a quiet in a kind of way, and you might respond to somebody's comment, or you might throw out a comment. This week, I saw a lawyer who was humble and said, look, I'm just starting out in this field. I don't know what I'm doing. I really don't know how to start. I don't know where to get a library, how to get experience, and what to do. And I was blown away with the number of lawyers that gave, and some of these were lawyers of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. They gave themselves so generously, telling this lawyer how they could do it. So it can be done. And that's the same thing that happened with me. The 3 lawyers I met in Puerto Rico just gave me a lift, gave me the confidence that I could do this.
I implore people who are listening to actually go out and reach out and maybe take that first step, right? I think it behooves a junior lawyer to reach out, whether it's someone in their own firm or if they're starting out their own practice, to reach out to folks within AILA or within different Facebook communities and just ask.
If I can offer a tip, there are some lawyers who just like to pose the question and not do the research. And I've had an associate or two in my career that would do that. They would come to me at 4:30 with a package that had to go out, and they needed an answer of how to do something. And depending on the circumstance, would give the answer, or I would say, what do the regs say? And if they hadn't looked at the regs, I became reluctant to do that more than once or twice. So someone that has done their homework and they say, here's what I've looked at, but this doesn't make sense, and here's why, they're going to have lots of people helping them. If they just send out, how would you do this? How would you do that? And you reveal your lack of effort and unfamiliarity with the law by the formulation of the question, you're not going to get a lot of help.
Yeah. Always do your homework first before you ask other people, because the reason you're able to answer that question is because you did the homework yourself in the past. And so people who are asking you for your expertise should show that they're also committed and they're not really being, I don't want to say the word lazy, but we have a really interesting question from Samir Kedekar. Angelo, you're the best, Samir says. Can you give us your thoughts on whether lawyers should be niching down within immigration? The field seems to be getting increasingly specialized over the years. So I think we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier in terms of when you're starting out, maybe going with one particular specialty could be, yes, an interesting way for you to take that next step. But, your thinking was that you're kind of not hedging yourself against the winds going in the wrong direction. But perhaps for a more established lawyer now trying to understand how to navigate immigration, do you think it makes sense to niche down, and whether it's just one particular visa type or maybe it's one particular agency you deal with or something like that? What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, Samir, thank you. You're a star in your own right, and I'm impressed with everything you've been doing lately. But what I would say is, I feel that one has to look at the economic circumstances and the government policies within which you operate, as well as the market forces in terms of competition, lawyer and non-lawyer competition in this field, and try to ascertain where your strengths lie within that context, and play to your strengths. Doesn't mean you can't improve in certain areas where you need improvement, but play to your strengths, because you're going to find that you're unique in a variety of ways. So if you do the personal inventory, you'll find the niches. I'm sort of like the movie Hole, or the book Holes, where they're looking for the treasure and they're digging hole after hole after hole, and I never know when I'm going to find that treasure, but I keep digging new holes in hope of having enough versatility that something that I know will continue to have demand. And again, as I said, there are multiple agencies, there are multiple practice areas. This year I've become a non-national interest exception presidential proclamation lawyer. And if you asked me 6 months ago, would I be practicing in that area? I would say no. But I knew consular work, I knew business immigration, and that's where the demand came up.
One thing I would also add to that would be the idea that, kind of like you said, you want to play to your strengths. Your strengths might be, first of all, your actually knowledge and expertise in the industry, in the immigration space. It can also be something that comes out of your non-legal experience that can inform your legal experience. So, for example, if you're, let's say, working with athletes on a P1 visa, or artists and creatives on an O1 visa, and well, guess what? You've actually been doing theater on the side for the past 20, 30 years. You can lean into that personal experience and use that to get clients within that sort of niche, and build your business in that direction as well. And so I don't know if I think that kind of dovetails on the idea of playing to your strengths, because you're still practicing the law, but you're pulling into some other part of your life to stand out in one way or another. And
you're integrating both sides or all sides of your personality and your skill set, and it's fun when you're integrated, when the internal and the external are congruous as opposed to incongruous. You're being authentic, you're being real, and people appreciate real.
And people can sense that too. I was
going to just mention one other thing. There are a whole bunch of skill sets that I haven't even discussed, but some people are great listeners. Some people have fantastic emotional intelligence. My wife doesn't think I have much in that area, but if you can listen and you can show compassion and people feel it, you'll get clients just from that.
How would you exhibit that in a way for clients to see that?
Well, there's I heard this quote that the biggest compliment you can pay someone is to give them your undivided attention. Just show that you're listening, active listening skills, feeding back to them what you've heard, making sure you're clear on what you heard. People will say, hey, this person gets me. This lawyer is someone I can trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, to sort of piggyback onto the improv or the theater part of the discussion, that is a critical skill to being a really good improviser. You have to listen to your fellow performer on stage, because remember, with improv, there's no script and you're making everything up as you go along. You have to not just hear the words that they're saying, but you need to hear the emotions. You need to see the body language. You need to understand the context, and then sort of continue on with the scene. And that's one of those skills where when I took my first improv class, my 1L summer, it was funny. My first week of my internship at Fragaman, I think I just went to my manager and I was like, hey, by the way, I'm going to have to leave at 6 p.m. on Wednesdays because I have an improv class. And I had just started my first ever, big boy internship as a law student. And they were really cool about it, which I really very much appreciated. But as soon as I took that class, I was like, wow, lawyers are missing out from this incredible, incredible training. So yeah, active listening was absolutely one of the things that I learned that I still try to utilize today.
The other precept of improv is it's yes or yes but or yes and, but it's never no.
Yeah.
So you want to figure out a way to avoid cutting off the conversation if you can. You might want to cut the conversation off, and then you can use no. But if you want to reach out to people, you've got to show that you can absorb what they're giving you, and play it back and see where there's common ground.
There's so much that I want to continue to dive into, but I want to be respectful of your time and everyone else who's watching and listening. I want to just do a very quick high-level recap, and that is that if you play to your strengths and you realize and recognize what makes you happy, and you take your career in that direction, you will be happy doing what you're doing, and people will be able to notice that and will be happier to be with you. That brings business. And in order to sustain and grow that business, you have to somehow continue to stand out, continue to be different, whether it's through putting on a fun costume, or through your thought leadership with writing, or through quite literally anything else, niching down, as Samir said. To me, I took that away as a lesson of like how to have a happy life as an attorney. And especially if you run a practice or are trying to build your practice, how to build it in a direction that will be sustainable for you, both financially and hopefully emotionally too.
Well said.
So if I can ask one more kind of fun question, you said when you were an undergrad, you kind of, at least partially, went to law school because you wanted to give people a concrete sort of answer as to what you're going to do with your life. If you didn't go to law school, what do you think you would have been doing right now?
There'd be a decent chance I'd be a barista at Starbucks. No, I'm kidding. I would like to be probably a writer or a comedian, stand-up comedian. And I probably don't have sufficient talents in either of those areas. When I speak of writing, I mean creative writing, whether it be fiction or nonfiction, but script writing, whatever. Those would be fun things. I don't know whether I would do those, and I'm not really sure I have the talent in those areas. But my next incarnation might be that.
Well, if it's of any relevance, one thing I've been wanting to do for a very long time is put together some kind of an immigration lawyer improv or theater troupe and do something fun at ALA events or otherwise. So maybe we can make this happen sooner than you think.
Sign me up.
Well, Angelo, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom and your insights. And we could have gone on forever, particularly around some of these topics around marketing, but there's so much takeaway from here. So really appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts with us today.
Had a great time. Roman, you're doing good work.
Thank you. Trying my best here. Thank you. All right, folks. Thank you so much for joining, for sticking around, for asking questions, for listening. Even after this is live, please drop more questions. Send me any questions or comments. Shoot over any messages to Angelo as well, and reach out to people if you have questions, if you need mentoring, if you have, you want more insights, please reach out to folks. We're all here to help. As Angelo said, none of us individually are as good as all of us are together. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but I think that was sort of it. So have a good weekend, everybody. And thank you so much again for joining.